Hello and welcome to another edition of Redleg Roundtable. Today I'm thrilled to have two guests on, broadcasters Jim Kelch and Matt Andrews. Guys, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, no problem, Seth.
Great to be with you, fellas. Two
Awesome.
longtime friends.
Yeah, I love reuniting you two. This is good. Jim, let's start with you. You began broadcasting Louisville games. They were the Redbirds back in '89, and you work with Joe Buck and later on Todd Callis, but your stint went all the way to 2007, and then in 08 through 17, you're a Reds broadcaster. Welcome on. Thanks so much.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. Back in those days, it was the Cardinal affiliate for Louisville, and in a stadium now that no longer exists. The old Cardinal Stadium on the fairgrounds has been torn down. So you had Freedom Hall on one end, you had Broadbent Arena on the other, and then right in between was squeezed Cardinal Stadium. No longer exists.
Well, I was going to talk about that a little bit later. The stadium now is as good as you get down there in Louisville. So especially for a AAA ballpark. Hey, Jim. Matt, you joined Jim in 03, and I didn't need to look up your story. You began broadcasting in high school, and you worked with me at Ohio State Student Radio. You went on to be the lead broadcaster until 2016. Then you came home. You do Ohio State baseball games as well as women's basketball, some men's basketball, and football. So thanks again, Matt, for joining me.
Yeah, and my fault there on the open. I should have said three good longtime friends here. We've known each other. I've known you both for a longer time than our three-person relationship. But yeah, we've got a good background, good history, and we came up together, Seth, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Jim, I wanted to pay you this compliment. I'm a year or so ahead of Matt in college, and when he went on to work with you, I couldn't have seen a better person take him under his wing because I felt like, and I think Matt would probably say the same, you showed him the ropes in great ways because Matt became quite the broadcaster under your tutelage.
Well, that's nice of you to say, and to be honest, the kind of guy that Matt was and was exactly the kind of guy that I was looking for, because I had done 3 years by myself, and Matt knows how tough that is because he did it later on in his career at Louisville by yourself at 140 some games. And so when I went to the management and said, look, I'd like to bring on a partner, they were agreeable. He had to be able to sell, which was kind of a disdain for all of us in the broadcasting side of things. But I was looking for what I wasn't looking for was a guy who was like, I'm going to come in, do my thing. I don't care about you. I don't care about the city. I don't care about the team. I'm just looking to take my steps. And if I have to step on you to move up, I don't care. I wasn't looking for that kind of guy. I was looking for a guy who loved broadcasting, who loved baseball, who was willing to become a part of what we were doing as a piece of what we were doing, not of, hey, you guys are doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, don't bother me. So when I found Matt through Bill Lee, it was perfect.
Well, that's Matt to a T. You've just described him. Jim, I wanted to ask you, again, Ohio State was where Matt and I met, and so his background I already knew. What did you do before you ended up with the Bats? Well, the Louisville franchise, I should say, before you ended up there in 1989. What was your broadcasting start as far as college and then right out of college?
Well, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, home of Bradley University, where I went to school, and decided to get into broadcasting there with no real experience. And Bradley now has a much better broadcasting program, thanks to Charlie Steiner, than they did back in my day. But I wanted to do it because I grew up listening to Jack Buck. Jack Buck was my broadcast hero. I mean, I didn't care what was going on. If Cardinal game were on and Jack Buck was doing the game, I wanted to hear it. And I wasn't even a Cardinal fan. I was a Cubs fan.
Okay.
So I wanted to do this. And as I got into college, I decided I was going to try it, but I was a little bit shy and not as outgoing as I probably could have been or should have been. But I got into it. And then I got really, really lucky. When I got out of college, I got a job in sales at a radio station. Wanted to get a job on the air, but with no experience, people really aren't going to hire you. So I got a job in sales, and I'm grateful for that because I didn't know anything about the broadcasting business per se. I just knew you went and did the games. I didn't really even know anything about that. But I learned the business of broadcasting before I learned broadcasting. And then as I did this for a couple of years, I got a job at a small radio station outside Peoria that did high school games. They made me change my name to Jim Bradley. I used Jim Bradley for a couple of years. Matt, I think
I didn't know that.
Who-
You should have shared that earlier in our tenure.
Well, I was Jim Bradley, but I would forget sometimes. And my partner who I was working with forget. He would call me Jim Kelch, and I'd say, "Hey, it's supposed to be Jim Bradley." He goes, "Oh yeah, sorry." So that didn't go over that well. But I did that for a few years at this station, and then eventually got a full-time job at this station because a guy that I went to high school's father owned the Peoria team, Pete Van Auken, who was great friends with Harry Carey for all those years. And Pete owned the team, and I went to him and said, "Hey, if I could get your games on this small station that I'm working at, would you let me do the games?" And because I knew Pete and I knew his son, he said, "Yeah, you get the games on the station. I'll let you do the games." And so that's what happened. And I did them there in Peoria for 3 years, Class A, Midwest League. And then right at the end of the 86 season, there was a guy who came in. We were in the playoffs playing Waterloo. And there was a guy that came in and was using an auxiliary booth in our ballpark. And I asked one of the administrative guys, "Who is this and why is he in the booth?" And he said, "He's a friend of somebody. And he said there's an opening in Chattanooga and he's trying to make a tape to send it down there." And I thought, "Oh, AA Chattanooga. Interesting." So when that whole series ended, I called Chattanooga, and yes, they did have an opening. And here's the guy you should send your stuff to. So I sent my stuff down there. And then, I don't know, sometime later, Pete Van Auken himself called me into the office and was mad at me for applying for this job. "Haven't I treated you well? Blah, blah, blah." And I said, yeah. "Why are you applying for a job in Chattanooga?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a step up. And I don't know if I'm going to get it or not, but I just wanted to apply." And he goes, "Well, actually, the guy in Chattanooga, his father was a friend of Pete Van Auken. And so when he saw that I was working for Pete in Peoria, he called him and asked him about me. And he goes, 'You're going to get an interview.' So I got an interview with Chattanooga at Bill Lee down there. And I got the job and was down there for 2 years doing Lookouts games. The first year, we were Seattle affiliate, missed by 1 year of having Ken Griffey Jr. on that Seattle team. He had been at AA the year before. And then the second year, 1988, we were the Reds affiliate, won the Southern League Championship, and just missed having Brian Price be the pitching coach. Brian Price had been the pitching coach prior to Chattanooga for the Reds, and he moved on. So just missed having those guys. But then after the 88 season, I was at the winter meetings in Atlanta, found out about the Louisville opening and applied for it. And just so happens to see, you have to have a modicum of skill, but you have to have an incredible amount of luck.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had luck in Peoria, I had luck in Chattanooga, and then I had luck in Louisville because they had an independent broadcaster who wasn't what Matt and I call dedicated to the business. And so they were looking for a guy that could come in and do sales and do the games and work for the team year round. And I happened to have that experience from Peoria, from Chattanooga. And so when I applied for Louisville, they're like, yeah, this is the kind of guy we're looking for. So I was able to get the job in Louisville. And so that's how that whole thing broke down.
Well, you're right. You have to have luck. You have to have fortune. There's plenty of AA and AAA guys out there that probably are as good or better than the big league guys, or a lot of them. But I will tell you, being around Matt even in college, Matt, you prepared for games. We called a NCAA tournament game together in 2001 down in Greensboro, and to watch you prepare the night before, we decided not to go out with the other guys. We stayed in the hotel room, and you hit the books. And then I know Jim showed you really how to prepare and to see the preparation that goes into being a good and ready broadcaster. I think John Sadak, certainly he paid his dues and he's with the Reds now, but to see his preparation as well, you can see it's evident.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, when I got involved doing high school games, I'd even do a little prep on side notes, charts, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, to me, this is how you can call a game formidably and be able to make it make sense, add up. If there are notes you need to add, there are things you want to bring up." So I started that then. But ever since I got to college, Seth, I was of the mindset that if you're not doing prep for each game you do, you're doing a disservice to you and to the listeners. And I thought I knew when I got to Chillicothe, my last 2 years of college, to call Paints baseball independent ball. I thought I knew how to call a baseball game in terms of prep and stats and scorebook and scoring games and the notations to make, but I had no clue.
Mhm.
I learned that from Jim.
Absolutely.
And I try to take a little bit from everybody. People say, listen to other broadcasters, understand what they're doing, follow their study. Take a little bit from everybody. I'm not saying use their slogans and their sayings. Take a little bit from their prep, from their work, from what they do, and be better and add to your repertoire, and realize that there are different ways to do things, but there are also more beneficial ways for the listener and for you to be informed. And I owe a lot of that, especially in my baseball career. And we worked some basketball together, even down in Chattanooga one time. But Jim, I learned a lot from him on that regard as well.
Yeah, both these guys have done their share of basketball as well. Let's get away from the broadcasting just a bit as far as the ins and outs of it. We want to talk some baseball as well. If both of you would take a moment and tell me a little bit about the grind of being a AAA broadcaster, and I know it's evolved over the years. It was probably much harder, Jim, in 1989 than it was toward the end of your tenure and what you're doing now again. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that make it more difficult maybe than flying charter flights with the big league club and things like that.
Well, when I first started doing games full-time back in Chattanooga in 1987, everything was bus. I mean, it was the Southern League, and so it wasn't, I didn't find it that difficult. And truth be told, I was so enamored with doing every game, because in Peoria, I only did like 60 or 70 games a year. So I was so enamored with doing every game that the bus trips meant nothing to me, nothing. And then when we got to Louisville, it was pre-COVID and pre-9/11, I should say. And so we flew a lot of our trips and just had all the equipment go on under the plane, and it would come through on the luggage rack when you got to the airport, and the clubbies would be there to pick it up. And we had a lot of early morning flights, a lot of connections, but particularly in those early years, Seth, I just didn't care because I enjoyed it so much, and there weren't many off days. But boy, you got a lot of innings. All we did was do games, and you got to know the guys, and I enjoyed it. And as the years went on, you wished for an off day here and there to just kind of recharge. I think Matt can agree with that, particularly when we were doing the games by ourselves. Like, boy, just one day right here would really be a good thing. And I think our slogan always was, when you're working in minor league baseball, you have things that are going on at home, and you're doing the games. And then the team goes on the road, and the front office people would say, thank goodness we have a day off coming up. Thank goodness we have a week where you guys are on the road. And we would say, thank goodness we get to go on the road to do the games, because it wasn't a job. It's a career. It's a passion for us to do play-by-play. And I'm going to jump ahead just for a second by saying this. When my tenure with the Reds ended in 2017, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to continue to do baseball, certainly at the big league level, maybe at all. And when Nick Curran gave me the opportunity to come back, my first thought was, I don't know if I can. But then I thought a couple of things. One, what else do I know how to do? Nothing. What else do I want to do? Nothing. And so I went down there and started doing it, and realized that, doing it at the big league level is the best. But just doing it is a great way to make a living. So just to jump ahead right there, it's like I could have been burned out on it, but it wasn't that way. It was like, I love doing what I do. This is what I do. And I have come to now really enjoy again being back in Louisville. So the grind of it is there, and it's certainly better now, as you say, because every Monday is an off day in the minor leagues. But I didn't mind the grind that much. Once you got to where you were going, it was fine. I didn't mind it.
Okay. Matt, did you have any other thoughts on kind of that grind?
Yeah, the grind, that was real. And that was something you had to embrace. And at times there were tough moments, Jim would tell you there were tough moments where other distractions within your job and what you're doing there with the ball club, because in the minor leagues, we worked a number of different roles. But the thing that I remember most about the grind and being willing to embrace it, I guess it was probably '05 or '06, maybe '07, the third or fourth year that I was in Louisville, and the teaching equipment to certain cities, a la without flying, busing it, or I'm sorry, flying, not busing it. And the thing would be, so they offered a couple of people in the front office to drive the equipment to Norfolk, to Durham, to Charlotte. We went to Richmond, and myself and a friend of ours in the front office, a coworker, we offered to drive it after the Bats home or road games to the other city and then back, and the opportunity to do games. And that was all about, while it's a grind and it's a long season, as Jim said, people doing things that we're not doing on our off days because we're with the team. We have games when the team's on the road. That was part of embracing that grind. The second thing I would say is the off days now that have increased greatly in the minor leagues with Mondays. That's incredible to me. I think I'd have been a whole different person broadcasting later in my minor league time if we'd have had a few more. I mean, there were like 6 or 8 maybe with the 2 games at the All-Star break all year. And then the final thing, my time there, at the end, we did a lot of overnight sleeper buses. And I'll wake up at the sound of a bird outside. Mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, being on a bus overnight, there were 2 or 3 occasions when after the last 3 years where I would lose my voice with laryngitis because I simply couldn't sleep on that sleeper bus. So it's a whole different way. It's changing a lot. But there's some flying. The busing is not awful. The sleeper buses were ultimately difficult for me.
Okay. Well, there's another variable, and this may be of interest to Reds fans out there. Louisville's been the AAA club for the Reds for well over 20 years now. But the AAA level is a little different, right? Because guys coming up, for instance, last year with that crop that came up, they're only likely to be with you if they're going to be big leaguers for maybe a few months at the most. And then sometimes you'll get the guy that's coming down that's trying to get back up. Jim, could you describe, for instance, the career leader in hits at Louisville since 1982 is Aaron Holbert with 471. Corky Miller leads the franchise with 99 career doubles. I mean, we know Corky Miller as Reds fans of any length, but tell me a little bit about, Jim, about what AAA is like as far as the players you get and the fact that if they're really good, they're probably fleeting because they'll be up in the big leagues.
Well, you've seen the epitome of AAA with Louisville the last 2 years. Last year, with all the prospects coming up and doing so well at the big league level, the McLeans and the CESs and Andrew Abbott from a pitching standpoint and those guys. So you've seen a lot of that. Even Will Benson, even though he's a little bit older than them and wasn't a true Reds prospect. So you've seen a lot of that 2 years ago. That's a real rarity. Usually maybe 1, maybe 2 guys are on the verge of being a, quote, star in the big leagues when they come to AAA. And the rest are support players and what I always have called them insurance policies for the big leagues in case something happens. And then this year, you're seeing a team that is made up almost entirely of insurance policies. Nick Martini's been up 2 or 3 times. Nick Martini is a nice player. He's a good player. He's not a star in the big leagues. And so that's why I get a little upset with the big league fans, because when a Nick Martini goes up and down, Nick Martini comes back and he's hitting 210 and they're all upset about why in the world are we bringing Nick Martini up? Every player on the 26-man roster is not a star. Everybody can't be a star. So you need support players. And a guy like Nick Martini is a support. Blake Dunn, who came up for a week, is a support player. And this Louisville team now is made up of support players. So you get these guys that come in like Martini, like Dunn. There are others that have been in Louisville for a couple of years. Alan Buznitz, a pitcher, is a good example of that. He was in the big leagues. He went to Japan and pitched for 3 or 4 years. Now he's back. He's here for a second year. You're going to get guys like that because of injuries at the big league level, and you need guys who are competent enough to be able to come up and do a job, not become stars at the big leagues, but do the job. And they, as they get older, start to understand their role. That's why they jump around and they see, oh, maybe this team can need my skills more than this organization. So they jump around a little bit. So the AAA level does change a lot. There are fringe players who are there for 3 or 4 years, sometimes longer, as you mentioned, Aaron Holbert, Corky Miller. But there's a lot of guys who are there 2, maybe 3 years, and then they find what they feel is a better situation for them in another organization and a chance to get to the big leagues, and off they go. So it's something that you accept. And for the most part, and I was just telling Nick this the other day upon doing some interviews with guys in Louisville, for the most part, these guys are, if you treat them with respect, they will treat you the same way.
Matt, I was just reminded, and I couldn't come up with it first, but I just looked it up. Last time I visited you before you moved back up to Columbus, Chin-Ming Wong was pitching for the Bats.
Forgot that, yeah.
And but he was at the end of a stint where I think he opted out, right? I think he had done okay, but he just wasn't getting that big league call. And I remember, and I wanted you to speak to this because you end up with some relationships, whether it's because of being a broadcaster and being on the bus or the plane, but also you had some other like PR type responsibilities, I believe, during your time there. Chin-Ming Wong sought you out when we were leaving the parking lot the night of his last performance for the Bats, and he said goodbye to you. I mean, this is a reality. This is their livelihood as much as it is yours, isn't it?
You're right. And I think, as Jim said, if you show them some respect and see them appreciate what you're doing, if you show up for an interview and maybe you've got a few notes written down and they see that, they know it's a real deal for you, then yeah, it's real for them and for you. And when that happens, and again, I didn't think anything about it at the time. Frankly, Seth, I'd forgotten that story, but I do remember it now that you bring it up. We were heading out, from Slugger Field there towards the parking lot. But at times, and there are times when you'll hear from guys here and there, but showing them the respect is clearly the key for your profession for what they're doing for theirs.
No doubt. Jim, I wanted to ask you about 2001. Future at the time Reds manager Dave Miley was the manager of the Bats, the River Bats, I believe at the time, and they won the IL, the International League Championship, and those are few and far between. Talk about some of the names on that team. You had Adam Dunn there for a while, Corky Miller we've spoken about. I remember Brady Clark being just such a good player, ended up having some success with the Brewers at one point, and then Brandon Larson. We all wanted him to be such a good player, and he never made it at the big league level. What are your recollections of the 2001 championship team?
Actually, we just had 3 years ago a 20-year reunion of that team at Louisville Slugger Field, and they asked me to come down and MC an event that surrounded that. And Jeff Hollis, who Matt knows well, was the PR man for that team. He just brought up, he's an official scorer now for the Bats games. One of them, and he brought up a picture of the shot on the field of the celebration in 2021 for the radio booth. And I think a couple of guys that were glues on that team. You mentioned some of the players that were there, but a guy, Chris Sexton, a Cincinnati native, who was instrumental in that championship, and a guy that we all loved, Robin Jennings, who had some time in the big leagues. Was instrumental with that. Jared Fernandez, the knuckleballer, who did really well in the playoffs that year against Norfolk. So, those are just some of the guys that were with that team. Miley was the manager. Jay Sorg was the hitting coach, first base coach, who went on to be head baseball coach at Morehead State years later. But that was a team that was very, very good that year. And we were able to get into the playoffs. beats Norfolk 3-2 in that first round, won in Game 5, partially because there was a couple of days. And this is funny that maybe things would have started earlier in the finals had it not been for the weather that we had. We had a terrible weather issue where we had 2 days in a row in Louisville rained out prior to playing Game 5. And Chris Sexton ended up getting a triple late in that game because the center fielder of the Norfolk team, in trying to adjust to get a ball in the outfield, slipped on the wet turf and fell, and the ball went down and rolled to the wall. We scored some runs and ended up winning that game, and then sat around waiting to see who we were going to play because Scranton was playing Buffalo. The game in Buffalo went extra innings. I think it went like 12 innings, and we were all sitting around the ballpark waiting for that game to end. Finally, Scranton won it in extra innings. And then because of all the pushback with weather, they had to travel after that day from Buffalo, come to Louisville, and play Game 1 on it turned out to be September the 10th. And we won on a walk-off, bases-loaded walk by Rigo Beltran, who was a former Redbird from years ago in my early tenure. Turned out to be the pitching coach at Columbus for many years before now he's in the big leagues with the Guardians. But so that was rough. And then I was actually, 2 of my kids were in the high school band at that time. And my wife and I ran the concession stand for the football games. And on that Friday, the 11th, I was over there at the concession stand loading up the refrigerator with drinks and cookies and snacks and all this kind of stuff in preparation for the football game that night that my wife was going to run because I had the game. And of course, it never happened because when I was over there, I found out about 9/11 and saw it and heard about it, and the season ended up being over. But the Scranton people still to this day say it should have been a tie. We should have both been co-champions. But even with all the happenings, Randy Mobley, the president of the league, said, no, there's been a game played. The game was won by Louisville. So Louisville is the champion. So those are kind of some of the thoughts about that year.
Well, your memory. this is
It's
23
terrible,
years
by the
ago.
way.
Well, no. Hey, I tell my wife, I remember baseball stuff. I don't remember, what the groceries were supposed to be. Matt, when I got to interview Adam Rosales recently for this show, I asked you about maybe what's something you might ask Adam Rosales, and you said he was instrumental in kicking off. What was it? The Sweet three-peat. Rick Sweet was the manager, and Adam had great memories, I believe, of that 2008 year. But tell me a little bit about that run there, because that was a memorable couple years for the Bats.
Well, thanks, Seth. You got to understand now, my first year as the lead broadcaster wasn't until 2010, and they won a league division title that year. But that was the third of 3 straight division titles.
Mm-hmm.
Jim and I were a part of that 08 team. And Jim was, that was Jim's team as well. There were moments, because Jim was doing Reds games, but also still doing Bats games. There were a number, and the Kevin Barkers and Adam Rosaleses and John Atkins of the world, Corky Miller, those are the ones that stand out. And that was the kind of the beginning. Help me out here, Jim. I think that was kind of the beginning of that upcoming group of Bruce and Votto and all the good young pitchers that started to come through the Reds organization. But that team, with Adam Rosales being one of a pioneer, he wasn't a utility guy, but he'd play everywhere for that club. And he had the biggest moment, I think, of that season, and maybe kind of sparked all the success that franchise had over 3 straight years, winning 3 division titles, all, by the way, lost in the playoffs to Durham. But Adam Rosales was a guy that hit a home run in Toledo one night. I think it was like in late June, as we neared July. It completely turned the year, his season, their season, the next 2 seasons followed just as a winning. And a lot of that credit goes to Rick Sweet. Rick Sweet, and I think in 10, part of the final winning the division call was it's a sweet three-peat, and it was kind of cliche and hokey, but
it's good, man.
Rick Sweet was one of the main reasons for that franchise to have that run over those 3 years. And again, they ultimately didn't win the whole thing, but it was a great time there in Louisville. And up until when I left, that was the next to last. 2010 was the next to last division title that team has won since, and maybe still since. Not
Yeah.
sure, but yeah.
Jim, that brings up something else. There's just some oddities about, minor league baseball compared to the big leagues, but AAA specifically. Adam Rosales and Paul Yanish were both shortstops.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
you mentioned Adam played all over the place as well because he had to. But you can end up with multiple players at a given position who are technically prospects, right? That could be big league players. Tell me a little bit about that at the AAA level and kind of, how do they juggle, because the big league team kind of dictates we want him to play here or there or whatever.
Well, look at the Reds right now. They came up a year ago and they had 5 or 6 shortstop prospects. Ellie De La Cruz is a shortstop prospect. Noel V. Marte is a shortstop. Matt McLean is a shortstop. So they have all these shortstop players. But I think what baseball has done in the last 5, maybe even 10 years, and Joe Madden did a lot of this with the Cubs when he managed there, and that is players have to be willing to play other positions because late in the game, early in the game, it may be best for them to have Ellie De La Cruz at short, but maybe late in the game because he is prone to not making the routine play as much as some others. Maybe it's best to have Matt McLean play shortstop in the 8th and 9th inning of a game, or Noel V. Marte at third to start the game, but maybe they bring in Spencer Steer to play third base late. Players have to be willing to play other positions. There are rare right now. If you look at any roster, probably in the big leagues, it's rare. Or if it's not as rare, 1 or 2 guys maybe. Look at the Reds roster, that you have a guy that's like, no, this guy does not move. Jonathan India is playing second base only. But, I mean, you look at the Reds roster, other than catcher, name me a player who only plays one spot. I guess Ellie De La Cruz is only playing short, but he can play other positions. So I think it's players have to be willing to go and play wherever they can. And they'll tell you, I don't care where I play, as long as I get to the big leagues. If that's going to give me an opportunity to get to the big leagues, I'll do it. You talk to pitchers all the time who have been starters for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden they're now relievers. Tony Santillan is a good example of that right now in Louisville/Reds. He was a starter, came up to the Reds as a starter. 2 years ago, they said, you know what, we think you might be better served to be a reliever. And his answer wasn't, no, I'm a starter and I'm going to be a starter. It's whatever I can do to get to the big leagues, I'll do. Now you think of Tony Santillan as a relief pitcher. So that's what it's like.
Well, and to your point, Ellie De La Cruz played third base almost exclusively for about a month when he came up last year. India got hurt. McLean shifted over to second. And India was likely to play some outfield this year before some of the injuries and then Noel V. Marte's situation. I want to ask you a few questions about just specific guys and if you have memories of them. Some of these maybe were guys that only Jim saw, Matt, as far as being the broadcaster. But Dimitri Young, you saw Dimitri Young, Jim, coming up through the Cardinals organization, I believe. He was quite the character when he got to the Reds via trade for Jeff Brantley. Do you have any memories of Dimitri down in Louisville?
Dimitri Young came up, I believe it was 95 with the Redbirds as a player that had been at AA and was doing very well, and he joined the team late that season at AAA and was a switch hitter and did a really good job and was very personable. People in the front office liked him, fans liked him, and I think when the Cardinals traded him away, they were disappointed. But Dimitri Young was a really good guy. He was a player. He was a player that you could approach from a broadcast standpoint, and he wouldn't shun you or push you off and saying you're just the broadcaster, or call you. A lot of times, guys call you a radio or announcer or something like that. He knew your name, would call you by your name, and when guys are like that, to me, I think they're more human than some of the other guys, because the other ones, if they don't want to learn your name and who you are, not that they need to know your backstory, because they don't, but a common courtesy is to find out your name. You're with them every day for 5 months. They can at least, they don't even have to know your full name, but just know your first name. So when they see you, hi, Jim, hi, Matt. And Dimitri would always say, hi, Jim. Yeah, he knew who you were. And so I appreciated that kind of thing. And I thought Dimitri Young was a good guy. And I know he had his issues later on, but I always got along with Dimitri Young.
That's great. Now, Matt, if there was ever somebody who could have been big time, so to speak, but just from your stories to me wasn't being willing to get to know you a little bit and things like that, it would be Jay Bruce. Jay Bruce, first round pick out of high school, fast track to the big leagues. He didn't need to make a ton of friends in Louisville. He was going to come up to the big leagues. But I know from your experience, Jay was one of those guys that Jim's talking about.
Yeah, I vaguely remember Jay being in Louisville because it was so quick.
Mm-hmm.
But he was there with Votto and with Joey and Jay, and you look now at the careers that they've had. It was special to have them at the same time, but Jay went, I think, to Cincy in late May. And I remember somebody in the front office and somebody on the coaching staff, there were multiple people that, like, he won't be back. We won't see him again. Sure enough, a lot of those guys go up, come back. Jay was a good man, and I feel like that 08 team, I think it was 08. But yeah, I remember Jay being there very very briefly in Louisville, and then obviously the home run he hit to win the game and send the Reds to the postseason, and that was one of the great highlights as a Reds fan.
And I was just to add in on that, Seth. In 10, when Jay hit that home run, was my first full-time year with the Reds, and I was assigned to the clubhouse. I was sitting right outside the clubhouse door watching that on television. I was going to be the guy that went into the clubhouse. And when he hit the home run, I didn't really know what I was doing. I'd never done anything like this before. But Dave Armbruster, Yid, the producer, kind of gave me a rundown. Here's what I want you to do. You're going to be able to hear me, and I'll tell you, go grab this person or go try to grab this person. And we got through it. And it was one of the bigger highlights of the early years with the Reds for me. When I came back upstairs, finally, Marty said to me, "Great job."
There you go.
And that's all you need
to
know. It's like, if Marty thinks you did a good job, then all is right with the world.
Now you just made me remember something that's not in my notes, but I want to hit on it. You were in that booth in 2010. My wife and I are expecting our first child, and Matt says, "Hey, you want to come down to come meet me in Cincinnati?" It was probably mid-September. It was about a week or so before that home run, and Matt and I came and watched the Reds. We got to see Chapman, who spent part of that year in Louisville as well. Chapman pitched in the middle of that game, and we got to come up to the booth a little bit. And my goodness, Marty, who I had on a few weeks ago, he could call the game, hit the mute button, and turn around and just yell back at somebody and be a part of things. He was a well-oiled machine, wasn't he, Jim?
Marty is so skilled; it's incomprehensible to a guy kind of like me, probably like Matt as well. His ability to do what he did for all those years. I always tell people there's a lot of different aspects that go into broadcasting a game. One of them is being able to have the skill to describe what's going on and people understand what you're talking about when you do it. Another one is, through all the lean years that teams have inevitably, and the Reds had them too, to continue to have the energy to make the game worth listening to. And Marty always had that, even to the bitter end of his career. Marty had the ability to keep people interested and know in a blowout game that I've got to go in a little different direction here. And he was always asked about this, and his answer was a great one, and that is, each game is a new chapter of the season. Each game provides an opportunity for players to do well and the team to win. And I have to convey that. And I thought he did a marvelous job of that. And the other thing he did is there are multiple live advertising reads throughout a game. I mean, overwhelming, really. And each of these sponsors, the most important thing of that broadcast to them is their read. And so many people go through them and kind of blow them off, read them half-cocked. Like, don't give them the due that they deserve because they are spending money with the team. Marty never did that. Marty's reads, if you listen, they were just so professional.
Yeah.
He made the sponsor believe that he cared 100% about what they were doing. And that was, I just thought that was some of the great traits that Marty had.
There's
Yeah,
there's a reason he's a Hall of Famer.
Exactly
that's
right.
right. That's right. But hey, he he didn't have the ego that would make him not treat somebody, quote unquote, below him poorly. Case in point, I shared with him in 1999. I met him at the South Regional in the NCAA tournament. He was working for Westwood One. I was with Ohio State Student Radio. He told me to come look him up in the press box later that season. And it's probably May. And I somehow talked my way up there. And he sat with me for 45 minutes before the game. And I asked him the same question you said, Jim, because 1999, we remember, was a magical year. They won 96 games. They were terrible in April. They weren't that great in early May. And I'm asking him, I said, Marty, how do you do this every year when they're just not very good? And it gets to the dog days and they're not very good. And he basically said, hey, this is my career. This is my profession. The quality of play on the field, while maybe easier if they play better, that doesn't matter. I still have to give it 110%, right, Matt? I mean, that's the way he did things.
He always did that. And Jim saw it up close and personal. But yeah, and you never would. That's the thing that made Reds baseball so great on the radio with Marty and Joe. You knew there was going to, whether they win or lose, you knew there was going to be something of note from that broadcast. And that's what spoiled us all for so many years, decades of just growing up with that soundtrack.
Seth, let me just pass this story along because Matt knows this story, but many people may not. This is the definitive Marty Brennaman story. Going back to what you said, that he didn't treat people poorly. When Steve Stewart got the job with the Reds, I wanted that job really, really badly, and I didn't get it. And I was down in the dumps. And I talked to Marty about it. And Marty said to me, like most people would do, I'm sorry you didn't get the job. Anything I can do to help, I'll do. And I said, I appreciate that, Marty. Can I send you a tape throughout the season and you could listen to it and help me out? He said, I'll do something better than that. He said, here's what I want you to do. He said, the end of April, I want you to send me a tape. I'll listen to it. We'll get back together a week later and I'll talk to you about your tape. Do the same thing in May, in June, in July, in August. At the end of every month, I want you to send me a tape and we'll break it down and get you better. And I just don't know of, and it blew me away. I don't know of anybody in the broadcasting business that has ever done anything like that before. And when I had a chance to speak at events when I was with the Reds, and I liked it when Marty was there because I could convey that story. I just don't think anybody out there of his ilk does that kind of thing. And to this day, I'm grateful for what Marty Brennaman did for me.
Well, technically speaking, Jim, when you got to the big leagues, and I remember Tracy Jones saying this on one of his shows he hosted, but a lot of us felt this way. As far as calling the game, technically speaking, you were a well-oiled machine, and you were great at it, and we all appreciated it, especially those of us who, I was in broadcast school as well at Ohio State. I didn't end up going down that path, but for those of us that kind of understood what it meant and how hard it is to be that solid, we always enjoyed your call, especially when you got to be on radio.
Well, I appreciate that, and that was my forte, radio, and it came from, 20 plus years of doing minor league games, game in, game out. I enjoyed TV, but TV was like a 4 and radio was like an 8, in my love category.
Hey, but like you were saying about the players, if you get to the big leagues, you'll do whatever they tell you, right?
That's exactly right, and that's what happened with that. Yeah,
absolutely. Hey, I want to ask you one more question about kind of the players. You would have been there before Matt joined you. I believe it would have been 2001 when Deion Sanders was making a comeback. You would get players like that. I remember being in local radio here in Columbus, and Ken Schnocky at the Clippers would call a press conference, and we'd go over there and, Darryl Strawberry's making a rehab, or Jose Canseco here in Columbus when the Clippers were a Yankees farm team. Talk to me a little bit about Deion specifically, but then also the idea that at the AAA level, you'll get a lot of those guys that come down just to get ready to go back up as far as injury and things like that.
Yeah, you get him now. We have Noelvi Marte there, although he's not been a star in the big leagues. He did very well. You've had other people. We had Votto last year down in Louisville. I mean, you talk about a guy who's had a great career and will be a Hall of Famer at some point in the future. But Votto has always had a reputation of being hard to get along with, or hard to understand, and I could agree with that. When Votto was at AAA, he was a little bit difficult to talk with. I was in the big leagues probably for 8 years, and I got onto an elevator with him in St. Louis. I think I've told Matt this story. I got onto an elevator with him in St. Louis. I'd been there for 8 years as a Reds announcer, and he got on and he says to me, I said, "Hi." He goes, "Hi." A little different here than in Louisville, isn't it? And I thought, does he think that I'm here, like just up for the weekend from Louisville, or I don't know. It's just really hard to understand how he was 2 years ago when he started the year in Louisville, down in Nashville, 2023. I ran into him because he was down there on rehab right before the first game of the season in the tunnel leading from the dugout to the field. And he came up to me and said, "Hi, how are you? Boy, it's been a long time since I've seen you. What was that, back in Louisville?" And I'm thinking to myself, I was with you for 10 years in the big leagues with the Reds. And he just remembers me as the guy in Louisville. Deion Sanders, really quick. We were playing in Columbus that year. And Matt and I always did this. Like, a lot of teams now in the minor leagues, and Nick and I talk about this now, have gone away from doing pregame interviews. It can be difficult to do pregame interviews, not so much in the big leagues, but certainly at the minor league level. And they just come on 5 minutes before the game, go in and do the game because it's easy. It's so easy that way. But in order to really treat the fans properly, I think you have to help them get to know who these players are. So we still do radio interviews. And back in those days, we were doing them. And we didn't try to shy away from the big league guys. Yes, it was a lot more difficult, but you had to do it. You had to do it. And so when Deion was with us, it came to the time when we were in Columbus, when I thought it's time to try to interview Deion Sanders. The clubhouse at Old Cooper Stadium was a disaster. I mean, it was a closet. And they're all sitting around in that back couch area, Matt. You remember that area?
Shout out to Marvin Dill. That's
Marvin,
right.
Yeah. And Deion was sitting there with people all around him. And I asked him if he would do a pregame interview with me. And he kind of went into the Deion mode. And, like, when do you want to do it? Where do you want to do it? And I said, now would be great. And he's like, I'll do it, but we got to do it right here on the couch. And so I had to sit down there next to him on the couch with all these players around doing the interview. It wasn't one of my best interviews, I'll admit that. But the fact is, we did it. We got the interview done, and I aired it. And you can't shy away from things like that because it's your job. You have to do it. And even though it wasn't a great interview, I felt good about it when I walked away.
Well, and a little bit different from that, Matt, though, especially before minor leaguers began. I don't know that it's fixed, but they're getting paid a little better now than they used to, I think. But especially before that, when the spread might be a bunch of peanut butter sandwiches. Matt, I remember specifically Jason Isringhausen being down in Louisville, and some of those guys, Dontrell Willis, some of those guys, they would kind of take care of things, wouldn't they? And boy, when you had one of those big league guys, Matt, the spread seemed to be a little better, didn't it?
Oh yeah, no doubt. And they weren't going to do it the whole time there, but every third day or something, first day, midday, last day, they'll take care of you, and that's a benefit to the clubbies and the clubhouse attendants and all the people that work in their sector as well. But thinking about the teammates that are getting to eat, and they'll throw down $1,000 and not think twice about it for just feeding the team, and those guys appreciate that. Certainly.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, hey, I'll get you out on this topic, Matt and Jim. Thanks so much for your time. Matt, in 2004, I get married. You were in my wedding. Thanks, Jim, for letting him leave Louisville or leave the team for a weekend.
I think that leads to a whole nother story, but we won't go into that now, right, Matt?
Correct.
I know how hard it was to get away.
The Mark Boyle issue. Yeah.
I appreciate it. but you, Matt, were my designated King Griffey Jr. 500 home run watch guy. I may have got you in trouble with my now wife at that time. You had an earbud in your ear during the rehearsal dinner, and even throughout the wedding reception, you had an earbud in your ear. Of course, the next day we had a brunch at my in-laws, and I happened to walk in off the patio right when he took his spot at the plate and hit the home run. And so I got to see it live. But leading up to that entire week of will he hit it? Will he hit it? And you were there. Can you tell me a little bit about your memories of that weekend?
Your weekend? I wasn't. I don't think.
Griffey. Yeah. Griffey. Yeah. That's what we're talking about.
Right. Wait a minute. Yeah, we set. I think that was No, we did not sit in the Diamond Club seats, but we went a number of times to be there and be able to be a part of that lead up, the process, and then watching him do it. And it's funny you say that. Just a few days ago, I heard the Reds radio network call of Junior's home run to knock down the 500 club.
Mm-hmm.
Knock down the door to the 500 club from Marty. And that was, I'll be frank with you. I have great memories of that lead up and the moment, but none of it vividly stands out. Jim, you remember we went down there to one of those games with the lead up to the Diamond Club seats, got a deal from the Bats in mutual respect with the Reds. They had some seats. We sat in the Diamond Club seats, took Jim Rosenhaus, then of Buffalo, now the Cleveland Guardians radio network team. And we went there and sat there and watched one of these games. And that was a great treat to be able to follow Junior, to have him back home, to see him do that and leading up to it. The pomp and circumstance surrounding it was very similar to the 2010 division clincher game when you couldn't figure out when it might happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you went a couple of times, but one of the great moments as a Reds fan, certainly, in following one of the great names in Reds history, in Griffey.
Well, no doubt about that. And it was for me. I went to the Wednesday game, I believe, and he hit a warning track fly ball to right center in that game, and we thought, oh, we're going to see it, and then I had bigger things to worry about that weekend. But you were my right-hand man and at least letting me know if he did get the chance to hit it.
It's not my first time I put an earpiece during a wedding ceremony or a church service following an important moment. I'll just tell you that.
Well, we don't do fall weddings here in Columbus, Ohio, so I don't know what you're referring to there. Jim, Matt, thanks so much for taking this time today. I really appreciate it, and great to get together with you again.
Yeah, great to see you, Seth.
Great. Thanks
Matt,
so much,
always.
Seth. Jim, good to see you guys.
Yeah.
All right, hang on the line here just for a moment.